This week, we welcome Patrick Orzechowski, Vice President of Research and Development at deepwatch, to discuss why deepwatch chose Splunk to secure customer networks. In the Leadership and Communication section, how BSOs bridge the gap between corporate boards and cybersecurity, 5 questions CISOs should ask prospective corporate lawyers, good leadership is about asking good questions, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Stopping advanced threats requires knowing exactly what you're up against. ExtraHop Reveal X is the only solution that shows you not just where intruders are going, but where they've been. 90-day look back and complete network visibility across the data center, cloud, and device edge help security teams respond 84% faster with ExtraHop Reveal X network detection and response. Explore the interactive demo at securityweekly.com/extrahop. As a security leader, CyberArray for Teams was built to make your job easier. Are you struggling to measure your team's skills proficiency, provide critical or relevant role-based training, or translate training investments into meaningful business outcomes? CyberArray for Teams is the industry's #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on CyberArray. CyberArray for Teams. Skills development solved. Visit cyberarray.it/solved to solve your training problems.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 202, recorded January 11th, 2021. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me from G-Unit Studios are the birthday boys, Mr. Paul Asadorian and Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Happy birthday, Paul.
Happy birthday, Jason.
Well,
it's been such a strange year for so many reasons. Did the Browns win a playoff game? Is that
what? They did. Yes, they did.
Wow. First they made it, then they won one.
I mean, it was a wild card, but still.
Anything can happen.
That's right.
Anything can happen. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows, not including the Browns? Submit your suggestions for a guest by visiting securityweekly.com/guest and completing the form. We will review those suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Also, learn how to conquer cloud complexity in our first Security Weekly webcast of 2021 on January 28th. Register at securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you've missed any of our previously 2020 recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available at securityweekly.com/on-demand.
Matt, I thought you were going to say also the Steelers turned the ball over like 6 times in the first half as well, but you know.
We'll talk about that in the next segment. This segment is sponsored by deepwatch. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/deepwatch. Patrick Orzechowski is a seasoned cybersecurity leader and technologist building analytics-driven solutions for the past 15 plus years and one of the founding members of deepwatch. He's worked in many industries, including telecom, healthcare, and the U.S. intelligence community on both blue and red teams. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from Stockton University and a Master's in Computer Science from James Madison University. Patrick, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sorry to start the whole thing with Browns trivia. I know we were talking about Philly. They just fired their head coach, so you get to start over, I guess.
Yeah, we're not as excited in Philly as you are in Cleveland, but we'll get there.
Yes, we'll get there. Every team goes through its turn, right? It just took Cleveland like 18 or so years.
50 years? I don't know.
50 and counting, actually, if we think Super Bowl wise, yes. Patrick, we're going to talk about your decisions and kind of your process of how you chose Splunk for your customer base. But before we jump in there, I wanted to kind of back up a second. I mean, when we think about organizations and their cybersecurity program and building out security operations. Some organizations are going to build it themselves. Some people are going to outsource it. But what are some of the big challenges people have around building out a security operations program?
Yeah, I think number one is the diversity of data right now out there from a security perspective. Being an enterprise nowadays in the post-COVID era, you're moving a lot of your traditional data center stuff to the cloud. You're in a hybrid situation. You're using SaaS products. You're building things on serverless platforms. So the old traditional syslog everything to your SIEM and get that data in there is a little more complicated. And when you're building it yourself, there's a whole slew of requirements that you have to look at when you're building the brain of your sensor network.
Right. And when we had Corey Bodson on, I think, Enterprise Security Weekly last year, we were talking about data and what data should you collect and not collect. And that's the sensor side of the conversation, right? So you just kind of gave us a quick overview of like all the different types of data. But now I got to take all the sensor data and I need to bring it together so I can analyze it to really understand where are potential issues in my network to fix it. And that's the brain part of the conversation. Right. And so there's a lot of potential brains out there. What are some of those kind of key capabilities or criteria you should be looking for in your brain?
Yeah, for sure. So, as evidenced by all the startups and cloud native providers building SIEMs and data aggregation platforms, we have a lot of different requirements and criteria for choosing that brain, right? For me, and when it came to building out deepwatch's platform, time to value and flexibility was the real key there. We went down the path of looking at traditional SIEMs, looking at cloud native, building our own, and we landed on Splunk because it's flexibility and it's time to value. We knew we could onboard customers very quickly. And we can also onboard analysts quickly because of things like free text search and the GUI interface, and allow analysts to really ramp up quickly to find cybersecurity outcomes versus having to learn a query language or really having a long time to ramp up on a new SIEM.
Hey, Patrick, this is Paul. Thanks for coming on the show. I wanted to ask you, how was your evaluation process and ultimately like results different from an MSSP perspective versus an enterprise perspective? Was there some overlap there, you think, or like different requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of overlap from a service provider perspective, but for us, the flexibility of having different deployment capabilities from a service provider perspective was important, right? Splunk has Splunk Cloud, which is their cloud native SaaS platform. You can also deploy on-prem for customers who have to keep their data in their traditional data centers. And we also have our own cloud that we've built out for customers who want that out of the box turnkey SecOps platform that doesn't just include Splunk, but it's the from a raw alert all the way to a ServiceNow ticket.
Now, are you seeing shifts now with the pandemic from last year of these different deployment models? Are more people, now moving away from on-prem and moving into a cloud or a hosted service?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a shift, even from traditional industries like healthcare, who have compliance requirements to keep things on-prem. Looking at the cloud and looking at SaaS platforms as an easier way to deliver those outcomes to their customers. Authentication is a perfect example. When we started Deepwatch, it was mostly Active Directory data from on-prem, domain controllers. Now you have Azure AD, you have products like Okta and Duo, where you're bringing in data from cloud native into your SIEM platform. And the easiest way to do that is if the platform sits in the cloud as well via API.
Yeah. I mean, API integrations with other SaaS providers, it makes it easier when it's in the cloud to create.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're punching a bunch of holes through the firewall to make that communication happen.
Yeah, and that's. Go ahead.
I was going to say,
Sorry.
Patrick, I think you hit the nail on the head too. I mean, you're building an ecosystem now where you can onboard talent quickly, right? You can onboard your analysts very quickly with the technologies that you're using, the best of breed technologies, and then bringing your own differentiators to the table, right? Building your ecosystem out. One of the biggest struggles that organizations have with thinking about whether you buy or build is, I'm going to tell you, the biggest expense is the people, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the human capital is going to be the most expensive asset that you bring to the table. So the innovation is taking the technology, streamlining your processes, building context, your ability to onboard analysts quickly and get them up to speed quickly, and then, hey, by the way, the innovative squad model that we've talked about in the past, which I think is absolutely outstanding. Those are the differentiators. I think it's a full gamut of differentiators you're bringing to the table, and the technologies to help support that.
Absolutely, yeah. So onboarding of new folks coming in, we wanted to make sure we chose a product that wasn't a heavy lift from a training and ramp up perspective. I use the example of searching for an IP address. If you know an IP address is doing some badness on your network, you don't want to need to have to teach people SQL or another query language. You just want them to be able to go in and search the IP address, get some context, and then provide a ticket to the customer.
You mean a select IP from table Y where isn't intuitive?
Well, and there's so many different query languages now.
Yeah.
And I think those solutions work well when you've got, the right team that has the right fit with that technology. And Patrick, it sounds like you just want a much more quicker, time to value, because you've got a lot of people working for a lot of different companies, and that makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's another reason why we don't support any other analytics platforms or aggregation platforms. We want to make sure that, our analysts and engineers are experts in that Splunk platform and don't have to worry about any of the other products out there. Not that there aren't other, fantastic products in the market. We just wanted to make sure we stay focused and we give the outcomes to our customers that they want. They oftentimes don't want to know how the sausage is made. They just want to know that we're giving them good cybersecurity outcomes.
And that's time to value right there, right? Standard process means you're streamlined. And at the end of the day, Absolutely. They want a result. They want an outcome.
I think it also creates some very interesting flexibility in the model. It is by standardizing on the brain, the sensors are now where you get flexibility because there are lots of sensors out there, right? You don't have to say, well, I've got to be this type of endpoint customer to get value out of this, because you're standardizing the analytics really at the brain, not at the sensor level.
Yeah, absolutely. And we make sure that we normalize the data as it comes in as well. So one of the advantages of Splunk is schema on the fly. You can send it raw data all day and do free text search. But we also want to make sure that those fields that are important, like IP address, like username, those types of things, are normalized. So as you mentioned, Matt, we can take in any product and really focus on what the user or the host is doing, and not the specific feature of the product or how the logs come in or any of that.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Now, when we think about what's the value to the customer side, right? We've talked about aspects of flexibility. I've standardized the brain. We're going to allow the customer to have a little more flexibility on the sensor side. That's great. But what other advantages do you get as a customer with this kind of standardized brain processor, especially from a managed service provider?
Yeah, so again, we allow the flexibility of bringing in any product, and really economies of scale, right? So when we write an analytic for a product or for a customer, we can take that analytic, run it through our content management process, and distribute it to all of our customers automatically. So it really allows us to scale when an analyst is doing great work for one customer. We can take those queries and those analytics and distribute them to all of our customers, so all of our customers get the advantage of the work that's being done with one. And we're starting to focus on industries now. So healthcare customers, we're making sure that we know exactly what to look for in their environments, manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I took a quick look at the ecosystem, right? The differentiators, and part of it is your ecosystem. I mean, you have best of breed with Splunk, but you're also teaming that with best of breed other products like ServiceNow, right? So that allows you to create things like knowledge bases, internal, external knowledge bases. So you could have verticals looking up certain items that are related to them, and then publish that out to your customers too. So I think, having that information that you're gathering internally, but then having the ability to use a powerful platform like ServiceNow to help enable that information sharing is massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the advantage of choosing a flexible brain, as Matt's putting it, making sure that you can integrate with APIs for outcomes like ServiceNow. And you can integrate for active response capabilities if that's what you need, right? If you want to shut down an endpoint, you need to be able to have an end-to-end identification of what that original raw event was that will eventually become that, active response capability.
The other interesting thing we talked about a little bit on the economy of scale, you were talking about, leveraging an analytic. But that also means you're sharing data between these squads, right? And we can't forget about the human element that the managed service provider brings in. You guys have a unique model, but the ability to share across squads, I think, is also a very interesting angle when you think about it, because you might have some focus in a specific area, and that focus can be leveraged by other squads, maybe in other industries. Talk a little bit about the human element here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that really is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to incident response, right? Making sure that a human puts a set of eyes on things before it gets to the customer. We started deepwatch knowing that we didn't want to be just another reflective alerting platform, right? We didn't want to take an alert from an EDR platform, for example, and just ship it to the customer. It doesn't really provide a lot of value. So we wanted to make sure that our squads and our analysts look at these things and make sure that there's context there, right? The squad model allows us to, really have that good knowledge of a customer's environment, right? I've seen this before. It's their vuln scanner, for example. Let's go ahead and make sure we don't alert on that. And that knowledge, snowballs into the point where, we integrate really, really well with our customers via Slack. And making sure that we have that, human communication mechanism that's not just, a canned alert or a canned report.
Right. Yeah. Canned reports don't provide a lot of value, as we know from our days in the vulnerability management space. So where should a customer start, right? When you think about going down this path of evaluating a managed service provider, where should they start? What should they look for in their provider? We've talked about some of the highlights around deepwatch's offerings, but what should customers that are looking to engage these type of services, one, what should they look for? And number two, where should they start? Because this can become a very large engagement over time.
Yeah, it's a massive partnership when you do partner with MSSP or MDR, right? It's we call it a marriage. You get you get married for a year or 3 years or however long the contract is, and you want to make sure that it's the right fit, right? So first, I would start with, do they support the products and platforms that are already in place, right? If I'm an Azure shop and your MSSP doesn't support Azure, then it's a non-starter. And the next thing I would look at is making sure that the MSSP focuses on keeping the minutia of maintaining a platform, a complex platform like a SecOps platform, away from my security team, right? If I was a CISO, I would want to make sure that my security team is focused solely on my business security, and not, keeping the lights on with Splunk or keeping the lights on with any other product, because, it's a full-time job just to manage and maintain these platforms, right? And then you have a team doing that, and who's looking at the actual, incidents and alerts coming from this platform.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? I mean, that's a huge value add right there, because the talent pool is so slim these days that if your staff is busy in the weeds, busy on the run, I look at organizations. I've said it before on these shows. Is I look at organizations in really three modes. You can be in run mode, which is keep the lights on, or you can be focusing on growth and transformation of your organization, and the value of having a partner. And I consider it a business partner. At the end of the day, your MSSP and your organization need to be tied at the hip, and it's all about knowing who owns what, right, and at what time who owns what. So the value that you bring is you now allow the teams to be able to focus on the growth and transformation of their program.
Absolutely. The security program takes a backseat a lot of times to, troubleshooting, especially those inline things like firewalls and EDRs and things that can cause outages and introduce risk into the business. So yeah, we want to make sure that we're a good partner, and we're allowing those teams to sleep at night when it comes to keeping the lights on, as well as providing, our inherent cybersecurity expertise and giving that partnership value, to the customer and giving them, the warm and fuzzy that someone's watching the wall, Yeah.
One of the questions that came in from Discord, one of the complaints about Splunk sometimes is cost. It can get pretty costly to run Splunk, right? The more data you bring in, the more costs you incur. How do you balance that in the different offerings from deepwatch? And I think this ties a little bit into that second part of the question, which is, where should organizations start and where do they go? And how do you manage costs as you're maturing through that model?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned it. We have a maturity model that we roll out for all of our customers that prioritizes the data sources. In a perfect world, you bring in every piece of raw data from your organization, terabytes and terabytes and terabytes a day, without any added costs. But that's just not how it works, right? It doesn't matter what platform it is. Splunk gets a bad rap for being expensive, but other platforms are expensive as well. And at the end of the day, you need humans to look at that data, right? So we help our customers prioritize the data that's coming in to make sure that, we're looking at the things that the attackers are looking at, right? So, we don't want to bring in, on day one, DHCP logs, for example. We want to make sure that we're getting those authentication logs, DNS logs, firewall logs to make sure that we're catching the things that are the low-hanging fruit. Now, that's not to say that other log sources aren't important. It's just we prioritize them to make sure that we get the most bang for our buck from the Splunk license that the customers have.
And that's the key, is the economies of scale, right? I mean, we used to do that internally all the time where we'd have that shared business model, right? And now as things over the decades have progressed, now you're looking at that shared model now becoming a partner. It has to be, right? And you're realizing economies of scale on your side, where now you can basically bring that value now to the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can take all of the lessons learned over years of ingesting data and tell a customer, hey, you have this license. Let's make sure that we get the right data in first, right? Some of these nice to haves are great, but at the end of the day, you want to catch the bad guys in your network. So yeah, that's excellent point. We need to make sure that we.
And you just said it, right? Over time, you've learned onboarding best practices. Here are the log sources you want to start with. Here are the next set of log sources as we mature and as we learn your organization, right? And your program matures. Here's the next set of log sources you want to bring in. You've built those best practices. You don't have, as a client, you don't have to repeat that. We're learning from you, right? And what you've done with your customers. So again, economies of scale across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an iterative process, right? As we bring on more logs and more products, we leverage Splunk base, obviously, but we do have lessons learned, and we tune our regex, and we make sure that we're getting the absolute correct data on an iterative process. So the next time we have to do it, it makes it that much easier for the next customer.
Patrick, do you find customers are taking some of those more chattier logs that maybe for your analysts and other analysts aren't as useful or critical pieces to the puzzle? Like you mentioned DHCP logs, you could lump DNS logs in there as well. Do you take that and send those off to somewhere else that's much cheaper to sort of have as a reference? Do you find these hybrid approaches being effective as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, those heavier log sources, the chattier logs, you can dump them to S3. You can dump them to a syslog server for forensics later. And we do see customers doing that. DNS, internal DNS obviously is super chatty. But, as SolarWinds shows us, those DGA domains via DNS are critically important. We want to make sure we're catching those for our customers. So definitely, we can differentiate the types of logs too. If it's external DNS with, external internet-based domains, we prioritize those. But maybe your internal DNS is one of those more, nice to haves.
Right. Yeah. When we were talking about that with database query logs go in that category as well, because you tend to turn those on and do some troubleshooting. Then you're like, oh my God, I have to turn that off. Right. But then there are specialized vendors that have some specialized use cases depending on your team where you may want to collect those logs, but looking at that every day for security,
use them when you need them.
Yeah, it's probably not the best way.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll filter out the chattier stuff too, right? If it's a web database, some of those selects that happen a million times a day, we might filter out, but a select from the user database might be something that we want to look at, right?
Right. Yeah, and then you can have a solution that stores all those, and maybe you do go back and look. But I like your strategy, and we talked with Corey about this. Of like, you guys and folks know that these are the most valuable log sources, and we know we can do great things with these sources. I would love to have that for our organization, set that up. That gives now the organization much more freedom to go, well, what do we want to specialize in? Like, maybe we do want to have a place where we store all the query logs, and we're doing performance analysis, maybe some of our own security and performance, application profiling, right? But I know that I've got a team that's cherry picking the most valuable and effective log sources, and has a team whose talents and skills are tuned towards that as well. I think that's really in my assessment from listening, that's the value.
Absolutely. Yep.
In the other balance that has to be thought about here is it's not just the cost of the Splunk implementation. It's just the cost of Splunk and all the resources to analyze the data. And hopefully, when you think about an MSSP, they've got that balance kind of in balance, right? I mean, to the point where you're whatever data you're bringing in, there are resources there to analyze, evaluate, and extract value out of it. Because the people costs we already talked about at the beginning of this segment, they're expensive. They're even more expensive than these tools. So it's not just a Splunk cost either.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could evaluate any of the aggregation platforms out there, and there's always pros and cons. One might be cheaper, but they only support a handful of log sources, right? One might be more flexible, but it takes a whole DevOps team to maintain and manage it, right? So you have to weigh all of that when you're making the choice to bring in logs and build an aggregation platform.
Yeah, definitely important. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you so much.
To learn more about Deepwatch's managed service offerings, please visit securityweekly.com/deepwatch. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.